you know, I don't know the answer to that question, and I'll tell you why I don't know the answer. It depends on whose study you read. If you read fair studies, then they have one set of stats. If you read the other side, the other political spectrum, they have a different set of stats. And I was just looking, and I wanted to mention this book to you guys. I quickly looked at this They Take Our Jobs, which is a book that is what I consider to be a fairly even-handed treatment on the issues, meaning it doesn't tend to be completely pro-immigrant. It doesn't tend to, and it addresses a number of those myths. There wasn't really much that I hadn't seen in that, but it's the same issue. It's every single political organization that speaks to this issue has a different way of looking at those particular numbers. I will say this, as a representative of quite a few of the employers, the local employers who employ these populations, they all pay taxes. I mean, you wouldn't believe the employers who come to me and say, what do? I have this guy, he has this social. I look at the social, and the word security is spelled wrong, because in fact, he's bought the document from somebody, okay? But the reality is that, in short, that particular employer has been paying Social Security on what is a fake Social Security number, or a Social Security number that may belong to somebody, but certainly doesn't belong to that worker. And so whether or not it is truly the case that we have this massive Social Security surplus that we only have because, in essence, there's an unmatched Social Security fund, and my understanding was there's a certain pot of money in that fund. Don't know if that's true or not. I've never seen it, and certainly don't ask me to do the math. But I do know from anecdotal experience that our employers are certainly paying taxes. They're trying to comply with the law, and their employment taxes are going somewhere that should be attributed to those workers, but I don't know where. That's the extent. You're the economics expert. You can speak to that. Did you like my explanation on the Social Security surplus?
Yes, I believe the economists simply can't agree on this subject.
Right.
Certainly, if you include all immigrants, legal and illegal immigrants, there's a net gain. Oh, Mary's going to disagree with me. Okay. No. Mary Hoska, our resident economist, excuse me.
Excuse me. Who's done much research on migration, although not immigration. People who move from one place to another are invariably of prime working age, most likely to be male, but they are of prime working age. They normally move from age 18 to whenever the first kid is born. They stay, and this is as true as if they were moving from Lee County, Virginia to Roanoke, as if they were moving from Guanajuato to San Diego. As Dr. Solomon will tell you, this is a very healthy age group. They seldom require much medical care, unlike some of the rest of us. They either rent or own. They pay property taxes, either indirectly or directly, just like you do. They eat, they purchase other foods, they purchase clothing, they are paying sales taxes. Unfortunately, probably like many low-income people, they also play the lottery, which in Virginia means they're contributing to the school system that way, too.
They smoke, they drink. Not to make generalizations about the population, but they do.
They do.
They pay taxes on those products, which are heavily taxed.
Right. And they are also at the most vigorous age group for working. So the likelihood that their taxes are not paying for the services they are using broadly speaking, is very unlikely. They are probably overpaying. Now, are the taxes they are paying going to the right locality, the right government? That may be somewhat in question, because I think, for example, Mexican immigrants frequently crowd into small apartments, and so they're not paying as much property taxes. And if, in fact, they have children in the public schools, then you do have, you might have some imbalance there. That is, they're certainly not paying as much property taxes as a Virginia Tech professor might be paying. So?
Thank you very much, Mary. Is it realistic to envision at any point comprehensive immigration reform as a single set of statutes?
No.
If not,
Then why?
what should be the first policy step?
I'm inspired to say first kill all lawyers, but that has a different illusion rarely. The fact is this, is that the statutes I went through earlier are many of them are antiquated, meaning the statutes showing the reform that's passed in the last 150 years. But they're not really going anywhere. They'd have to be repealed to really have a true comprehensive system that's one set of statutes. And so instead, we struggle as attorneys, and we struggle as a community, really, with these various sets of laws. And now, with the increase in state and local governments passing both state statutes and ordinances, we are now struggling with what is, in fact, 3 sets of laws. When you add federal regulatory authority to the statutory authority, you're adding a 4th set, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, we as immigration attorneys struggle all the time with, USCIS's directors' interpretations of the statutes and regulations, which they memorialize into memoranda and to other legal documents, which are used as authority. But you're adding 5th, 6th, 7th areas of law which require interpretation. I think the biggest threat to comprehensive immigration reform is the fact that we really can't agree on what the system should look like. And we can't, unfortunately, mass educate. We can't seem to effectively communicate to enough people enough of the time which things are myths and which are not. And just as we saw with the statistics issue, sometimes we just can't agree what's a myth and what's not. And so that's probably a larger threat, in my opinion, to the unified front than anything. And so we thought, and the biggest example of that is the last 2 years. 2006, we thought we had comprehensive immigration reform. We have a conference every year in June. It's the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Every year we attend that conference. Every year we're educated on what is the likely, and we're educated throughout the year, but specifically at that conference. It is timed with the congressional sessions, not intentionally, but it is timed as such that we in essence struggle with what's going to happen. Everybody's asking, right? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? And every year for the last 2 years, 2005, 2006, 2007, during that conference, we thought we're going to get home and we're going to have comprehensive immigration reform. Both times it failed horribly. Not only did that fail, but the sub-acts, the DREAM Act, which was to benefit undocumented students, and the H-2B reforms that we expected to see late in the year for temporary seasonal laborers, those failed. So I think we're not going to see anything this year. I mean, it's an election year. Nobody's going to take that away from either of the political platforms. And I'd be real shocked if we have any consensus even by next year, which puts us well into 2010, which means we're all going to be terribly tired of talking about this by now.
Chris, what would you like to see as the first policy step towards immigration reform? If we can't get it all at once, what's the first thing you think we need to look at?
What a hard question. I think that probably I would really like to see some kind of amnesty, but I would like to see the amnesty be a tough amnesty, not just across the board that you pay your fine and you are granted amnesty, but that if you have been here for a minimum of perhaps 5 years and that you can show with documentation that you have been a productive member of the community and that you're able to prove that, or to indicate that in the future you will continue to be a productive member of the society, and that your not being there would leave a hole in our community, whether as a laborer or as a professional, that those folks could apply for amnesty and be well screened and then be able to seek a legal presence.
And I didn't really address that question, but you know, again, I would disagree in the sense that the legal system has to be fixed. If we don't fix these legal systems, for just to give you an example of H-2B, we have 66,000 of these visas that are available a year. Well, Congress didn't re-up the returning worker provisions. That means only 66,000 returning workers don't pass outside of the cap. So in short, if they raise that cap to a number that makes economic sense, and by the way, in each of those jobs, these people are not being underpaid. We have to go through a very strenuous process of proving that they're being paid at least what the Department of Labor tells us to pay them. You know, we have to pay them a market wage, depending on our community. Obviously, Franklin County is different than D.C. But, you know, the reality is if we don't fix those systems, or rather, let me put it positively, if we did fix those systems, both for unskilled and skilled laborers, same problem with H-1B, the cap opened on April 1st. H-1B is the highly skilled master's, you know, professional degrees. The cap opened on April 1st, closed April 2nd. I mean, he must have been swamped with medical exams, you know, in March or soon thereafter because of the cap opening. But the fact is that most immigrants want to do it legally. Most employers want to come legally. You fix those systems, they're going to come legally, you know? So we won't need as large a legalization, we won't need as broad spread of a legalization, or even maybe as a permissive a one, if we could fix the systems that are in place now that are broken or inadequate.
Yes, and you might not have seen it, but the White House announced an executive order. There was a change in the guest worker program today.
I saw that. I didn't see that.
Yeah, it was 3 departments. I think it was Department of Homeland Security. I know it was Department of Homeland Security, I think Department of Labor, and maybe the State Department. And they're going to allow employers to request a number of workers without specifying names of individuals they want to hire. And they're also saying they're going to make it easier for immigrant farm workers to move from one job to another without leaving the U.S.
So doesn't that just affect, isn't that just agricultural? I didn't look at it, but
I know they talked about agricultural workers.
there's 2 different programs, that's why I asked. There's H-2A, which is agricultural, H-2B, which is seasonal.
Yeah, I'm not sure
I haven't looked at it.
whether it's,
I think it was H-2A,
you think it was H2A?
but I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
Which is a great program. I mean, that's
So
actually,
it doesn't
that's the
affect
biggest
the
putting in the
program
proof.
you were
Well, it isn't, but that's the
Yeah.
putting in the proof. H-2A doesn't have the same cap
Yeah.
restrictions, or doesn't have the same cap restrictions. And frankly, H-2A doesn't have the same requirements that we have with H-2B, which is we can only apply 120 days before our seasonal need. It has some different requirements to it. So in short, the numbers of workers, and because here's the other thing, and I'm sure you can speak to this. Most immigrants who at least come into my office, who are undocumented, who are Mexican, Honduran, well, let me take back the Honduran, who are Mexican, who are coming here for seasonal work, or who are coming here for work, frankly, they really don't want to stay. Maybe if they meet somebody, they settle down, they get married, maybe they do. But really, for the largest part, they want to go back home. They have family there, they have connections there, they have ties there. I mean, is that true in some portion? I mean, you addressed that a little bit.
Not really. The folks that I work with are across the board families, and they're, you know, it's very different. But I think that something else that we need to consider is that when we're talking about immigration reform and talking about systemic failure in our government, I think that a lot of it goes back to NAFTA, which has created an even greater imbalance. And Mary, you should speak to this as the economist. But because of NAFTA, Mexico's economy is in a complete state of instability. Folks are not able to depend on work or anything else. And that's why so many of these people are coming this way. And their hope is that with their remittances, they will be able to build up the infrastructure and to build a life back home so that they can go home. So in that sense, they do want to return home. I only know of one woman in our program, one Mexican woman, and two Honduran women who come from abject poverty. But these three are the only ones who have any desire to stay here permanently, who never talk about when I can go back home. So I think you're right in that, Christine.
Yeah, and it, just as a follow-up with NAFTA, there are many economists who think that the price supports in our agricultural system, combined with NAFTA, which required Mexico to lower or get rid of all its tariffs, have increased poverty in rural Mexico. However, foreign investment in Mexico has gone up 225% since NAFTA was passed. And there is a proposal for a North American Investment Fund, which would be funded by Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, and would build roads, highways, and provide broadband internet service in parts of Mexico in an attempt to raise the standard of living there. This is just an idea that has been thrown out by the think tanks, and it's at this point it's hard to see whether it will ever get off the ground or not.
Well, and I can only speak to NAFTA on the issue of ITs. We represent a number of IT firms that routinely send consultants into Canada, and they were one of our IT clients was having a bit of a problem, which is why we were canceling the last time. We went in back in whatever month it was we had the schedule.
Yeah,
in essence, the provisions even there though are somewhat restrictive. I mean, you have a U.S. Worker who is got his master's or at least has a bachelor's degree in a technology field plus 4 or 5 years of experience, which translates into the equivalent of bachelor's and master's as far as the Department of Labor is concerned. And they're having trouble really, truly, fluidly crossing the border without some additional proof. Less so, I think, between U.S. and Canada, and more so between Mexico and the U.S. But there's still problems with that. I mean, it's a very fluid program, and yet it's not working as with the kind of ease that I think it was intended to.
Well, and if I could address that as well, when we were in Mexico doing interviews of the families we work with in Roanoke, we were up on the border in Ciudad Juarez, and there are so many maquiladoras, which are the factories that are there on the border, and they were Swiss, Japanese, not just U.S. factories. And primarily they employ women, and they pay them $50 a week for working, I believe they were 10-hour days that they work in the maquiladora, and they still don't have enough money to live on. They're still living in poverty, making those kinds of wages. And another thing that I would question with the plan you were bringing up is that so often when these think tanks decide that they're going to address issues in developing countries, they do not consult with the people in those countries, and consequently what they put in place is not what the people in that area find to be at all acceptable. They may completely raise a village that stood for hundreds of years because that's the easiest way to put the road, and it gets into a lot of moral and ethical issues.
I'm sure it does. Next question. A woman from Russia living here legally with her husband, who is a U.S. citizen, has worked by way of her green card and recently started her own business cleaning houses. Her mother is visiting from Russia, and she would like to employ her mother as a house cleaner. Who can advise her about how to do this and what paperwork the IRS would require? Is that even possible, Christine, legally, or?
Who am I representing, the employer or the alien?
I mean,
You know, come on. I mean, is it possible? Yeah, I mean, it's possible. But you know, the fact is that the employer can't employ an undocumented person. I mean, you have employment authorization, and you have to have it. So if I were advising the employer, which I perceive that I am, then of course we would say, do not hire this person. That's really not a good idea. Now, having said that, immediate relatives, you know, I don't know if y'all are familiar with the preference system, but we put family and employment into a preference system, and we say these people get highest preference, these people get lowest, and if you're from Mexico, India, or the Philippines, you're just forget it, because there's separate categories with much more accelerated dates for those, or much more retrogress dates for those. So I would say that there may be some options through family-based immigration, but I certainly would not encourage her to overstay her visa, because probably if she entered on a tourist visa, that there is no authorization to work incident to that status.